into this place of memory and hope. Come into this place of refuge and requirement. Come and you will find peace and disquiet, and your place in the order of things. Come to this hour of the search for truth and meaning in our lives together. I invite us to sing, joining our voices in the opening hymn of the morning. It's 299 in your gray hymnals. Make channels for the streams of love. I invite you to rise in body and spirit as you are able.
that ends the announcements. So please join me now in saying the words of our telesliding, which are printed in your order of service. We light this chalice for the light of truth, the warmth of love, and the fire of commitment. We light this symbol of our faith as we gather together. Each Sunday we take a moment to greet one another. Please reach out to someone you don't already know and introduce yourself, and there will be a musical cue when it's time to be seated.
Us to say words of our covenant. We are a faith that is bound by the promises that we make to one another, not by a creed. So the words we say and the covenants that we write and keep together are of utmost importance. And maybe this morning especially to pay attention to the words as we say them. So let me invite us to rise as we're able in body and spirit, say our covenant together, and then sing our doxology. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another. This morning feels to me a bit like a time for prayer for when words fail, or promises are empty, or ideals fall just short in our lived reality of them, maybe far short. When we see and acknowledge cracks in the foundations on which we build our lives, and there is some accounting to be done. Accounting in a soul, privately, unblinkingly, and in a nation, together to move beyond hate or inertia, called to change. So I call us first into shared silence together, that place of deepest listening, where our aspirations, our hopes, our hurts can whisper and be heard. Join me in silence. Spirit of life, larger love that holds us. We speak of freedom, but we build cages. We speak of welcome, but we build walls. We speak of abundance, but we hoard and protect what we have. Speak of refuge, but want only our own comfort and place for us to rest easy. In churches, they say that Jesus suffered the little children to come unto him. In many wisdom traditions, we are invited to be like a child, vulnerable, trusting, open. And yet the children come, and we take safety from their arms. Give them cold floors and meager food, let them suffer and even die. We say so much about justice. But what justice is in our acts? Just power, protecting itself from larger love. Let there be a time of reckoning. Let this be a shared hour, not just this hour, but the hours beyond it, of confession, a turning. Let the words we sing, peace, goodwill on earth, be sung through every land by every tongue. Let it be the soul of a nation reborn from the ashes of its actions once more. And let that nation be ours. Verdad y belleza cantando de cada tierra, cada voz. For these and all the prayers and needs and hopes spoken in our hearts, we pray. Years ago, when the losses of U.S. soldiers in Iraq reached over 1,000, a member of the church I served set up a meeting with me to tell me how horrified and saddened she was that we had ceased to notice the losses. There were no more newspaper articles about the war, no photos of coffins. All the soldiers on our side, on both sides, the Iraqi civilians dying, we blissfully went about our urban, suburban, rural lives, she said, while bloodshed and sacrifice happened daily in our names. At least we owed the soldiers the right to be remembered for their sacrifice, she said, and the people to name that they had loved that they had loved and killed in the name of war. She was right, of course, so we stumbled our way through an attempt to witness to this loss. First, one week and then the next, people offering their inputs and edits, the ritual changing and deepening, textured with meaning that we brought each week to our larger and larger sense of what we wanted to hold. Apparently here you did something similar. Finally, it seems like both communities, the one I served then and this one, found a way each week, reading the numbers or the names of those lost, a ritual of standing and sitting in witness that meant at least that we were not oblivious to the cost of war, to the losses, and doing so until war was declared over. This week, under different circumstances, we are calling ourselves in this community to the same kind of moral work and witness in this hour together and outside afterwards in public witness on the steps of our church. We are rising to see and to hold and mourn and take responsibility for what is happening in our nation and in our name. The loss, the cruelty, the death, human beings' inhumanity to one another. And I know the hope has already been voiced that this week's response might just be the beginning of another ongoing, evolving sense of ritual we could do in service and actions we could carry out in the world that we would engage in together until another kind of war is declared over, until camps are closed and children freed from cages and families united and those fleeing nations any of us would wish to flee, until all found a home where they could live out safe, their lives be fed, and together. To this end, to these ends we gather, this hour. So may the sacred work of community, a place of memory and of hope, witness to what once again in our time must be named and seen, and a world that must wake again to its better self. Before we begin, the offering for this morning's works and ministries will be given and received. Half of that offering will go this morning, that is not marked pledge, will go for expenses that we might incur in the creation of our ongoing acts of witness, buttons to hand out, things that might occur in the creative, generative process of thinking about witness together, and the other half will go to support our Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, which had its genesis in World War II, rescuing Jews and others from Nazi horrors. It will go to their work supporting immigrants' rights and human rights during this struggle. So in the spirit of all of that, our morning offering will be given and very gratefully received. Over the last year, the fiscal year, according to the Border Patrol, which begins in October for them, October of 2018, 7 children have died in federal immigration custody. In the previous decade, not a single reported death of a child was reported in federal immigration custody. So this is an enormous uptick in loss. We will tell this morning the little we know of the stories of these children, sometimes only the place from which they came and their cause of death. When we are done telling each story, their name will be said aloud, and as is one custom in ritual times of remembrance, at the close of our tribute to them, you will, after their name is read, please join together in acknowledging their life and their presence, saying, presente. I'd like to invite Jose Garcia and Don Shearer and Sharon Weld forward as we share these stories.
The mother of 10-year-old Darylyn Cordova Valle said she decided to migrate to the United States to work and provide for her 3 daughters. Darylyn, who was only 1 at the time, stayed with an aunt in El Salvador. 9 years later, though, Darylyn, like so many Central American children who are currently flocking to the U.S. southern border, made the journey to reunite with her mother in the United States. The girl was just over halfway through the trek from El Salvador to Omaha, Nebraska, where her mother lives, when Border Patrol apprehended her in March 2018. Darylyn had a history of congenital heart defects. She complained of chest pains and was taken to a hospital. Following 7 months of custody by the Department of Health and Human Services, surgery complications left her in a comatose state. Darylyn died of fever and respiratory distress at Children's Hospital in Omaha, Nebraska, on September 29th, 2018. Darylyn Cordova Valle. Presente.
Jacqueline Cal Makin, 7 years old, and her father left their home in San Antonio de Cortez, Guatemala, because there were no jobs there. They survived the 2,000-mile journey to the U.S. border, where they crossed illegally about half a mile west of the Antelope Wells port of entry in New Mexico. There they were taken into custody. After she was taken into custody, U.S. Customs and Border Protection put Jacqueline on a 90-mile bus ride to another location, though her father had told officials she was vomiting and feeling ill. Jacqueline waited an hour and a half after they arrived at their destination to receive emergency medical care. She died in custody in El Paso, Texas hospital on December 8, 2018, of sepsis, a bacterial infection that shut down her vital organs. Jacqueline Cal Makin.
Eight-year-old Felipe Alonso Gomez was from Neton, Guatemala, crossing into the U.S. with his father, who had heard rumors that parents with their children would be allowed entry. They were captured and held in U.S. Customs and Border Control custody in December of 2018. After a couple of days, Felipe got sick and was improperly diagnosed with a common cold and discharged from a medical center. The young boy died on December 24th, Christmas Eve, after losing consciousness from vomiting uncontrollably in a holding cell without medical staff present. Acting Director of the Department of Homeland Security said that during a budget hearing, that more than 100 certified medical practitioners have been deployed. But when asked if every child in the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol custody had access to a pediatrician, the Department of Homeland Security person answered with a confident no. Felipe Alonso Gomez.
Juan de Leon Gutierrez. On May 13th, 2019, Time magazine reported on the life of Juan de Leon Gutierrez, who at 16, as you can kind of see from the photo, had a small frame and looked far younger than his years, likely the result of malnutrition, which stunts many children in their community of indigenous Maya people in Guatemala's dry corridor, a hot and arid area spanning parts of Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. The previous 2 years, Juan's family had their entire corn and bean crop wiped out by a drought, which some say is the result of climate change. By all accounts, Juan loved school. When the school year rolled around, he would often beg his mother to put together the $130 he needed to continue studying, a privilege his parents had never had. But this spring, with drought looking again likely, Juan said he wanted to migrate to the U.S. to reunite with his 25-year-old brother in Miami, who had lived and worked there since 2011. On April 4th, he left home with another friend and a coyote, a smuggler, who would guide them. 15 days later, the teenager was apprehended by U.S. Border Patrol near El Paso after crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. He was transferred to a hospital after a doctor at the government shelter noticed he was sick. The Associated Press reported that he was released and hospitalized again a day later. Doctors detected an infection in his brain, known as Pott's puffy tumor, that could have been caused by an untreated sinus infection or head trauma. What caused the infection is still unknown. Doctors operated to try and save his life, but on April 30th, De Leon Gutierrez died. He went seeking life, his father said, but he found death. Experts agree that the Guatemalan government does not have the resources to ensure the survival of the families in Gutierrez's home region from yet another year of drought. And the U.S. president threatens to cut aid in punishment for Guatemala and other countries not being able to prevent migrants from coming to the U.S. Juan de Leon Gutierrez, presente.
According to an ABC News report of August 29th, on March 1, Yasmin and Marie Juarez crossed the U.S.-Mexican border after fleeing violence in their native Guatemala. 4 days later, the mother and daughter were transferred to the Dili detention facility, where they shared a single room with 5 other mothers and their children, in which some of the other children were sick. Marie also began coughing and experiencing congestion, according to the claim. And on March 11, a physician assistant in the detention facility, quote, diagnosed Marie with an acute upper respiratory infection and prescribed Tylenol for comfort, unquote. But the next day, Juarez sought help from medical staff again after Marie ran a fever of 104.2 degrees and started vomiting and having diarrhea in addition to her respiratory symptoms, according to the claim. Marie was diagnosed with acute bronchiolitis and an ear infection and prescribed an antibiotic, fever reducers, and oral hydration. Yasmin and Marie Juarez were sent back to the detention facility's housing area and told to follow up if her condition worsened. Marie's symptoms worsened over the coming days, and Yasmin Juarez, quote, sought medical attention for Marie multiple times, but was often left waiting for many hours, including at least 2 instances where she was turned away and told to wait for an appointment on a later day, according to her mother. By March 15, Marie had lost 2 pounds, nearly 8% of her body weight. Finally, on March 25th, 10 days later, Yasmin and Marie Juarez were transferred out of the Dilley facility and put on a flight to New Jersey, where Marie was diagnosed with viral bronchiolitis and tested positive for adenovirus and parainfluenza 3. She would spend the next and final 6 weeks of her life in the hospital in progressive respiratory failure. Marie died on May 10th after experiencing a catastrophic hemorrhage and irreversible brain and organ damage. Marie Juarez.
Excuse me. 2-year-old Wilmer Vasquez died after being detained by Border Patrol and spending about a month in a hospital, where he was diagnosed with pneumonia. According to family members, Wilmer's mother took Wilmer to the U.S. because the young child was severely sick and it was impossible for the family to pay for health care in Guatemala. Wilmer's mother cannot afford to return home for her son's funeral and must now work in the U.S. to pay off the medical debt she and her son accumulated in the U.S. Wilmer Josue Ramirez Vasquez died on May 14th, 2019. Health professionals counting the dead continue to ask why there seems to be a lack of urgency to improve the conditions in which migrant children are being held. Wilmer Josue Ramirez Vasquez. Presente.
"16-year-old Carlos Vasquez, known affectionately as Goyito, was a very intelligent young man who was in excellent health when he was taken into custody. His father told Telemundo Carlos was traveling to the U.S. from Acapulco, Guatemala, to send money to pay for his mentally handicapped brother's health care, which the family could not otherwise afford. Carlos died in the care of U.S. Customs and Border Patrol protection after being diagnosed with influenza on May the 20th, 2019. He was found unresponsive on the floor of a holding cell after 1 week in CBP custody, even though legally he could not have been there for more than 3 days. U.S. laws require CBP to transfer minors into custody in the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement at the Department of Human and Health Services within 72 hours, unless there are exceptional circumstances. Children are supposed to have access to a network of state-licensed or government-funded private care providers, as well as education, healthcare, and case management. Some say the cause of his death is neglect. Carlos Gregorio Hernandez Vázquez.
These are the 7 children that have died in Border Patrol custody so far since October 1st, the beginning of the fiscal year and statistical year for that organization. Keep in mind that every week other children die trying to cross the border. So we end acknowledging the life and death of one such child. We call out the name of Angie Valeria Martinez Avalos, who died on June 23, 2019, at age 2, before even entering custody. 2-year-old Angeli Valeria Avalos and her father, Oscar Martinez, and mother, Tanya Vanessa Avalos, left El Salvador and had spent 2 months in Mexico, awaiting summoning by U.S. officials to formally request asylum. The family grew frustrated waiting and decided to swim across the Rio Grande near Brownsville, Texas, on Sunday, June 23rd. In one version of the story, Martinez first crossed the river with Angie and then placed her on the U.S. side. He started swimming back across for his wife, Tanya. However, upon seeing her father leave, 2-year-old Angie got nervous and jumped into the water. Martinez swam back for Angie and clung to her, but a strong current took both of them. Tanya saw them be overtaken by the current and drown. In an image captured in a photograph that is seared into many of our hearts and minds, the father and daughter were found on the banks of the Rio Grande, the child's arm wrapped around her father's shoulder and neck, lying face down. On that same day, U.S. Border Patrol agents found 4 bodies along the Rio Grande in Texas's Rio Grande Valley, about 55 miles west of Brownsville. 1 toddler, 2 infants, and a 20-year-old woman. Last fiscal year, 283 people died trying to cross somewhere along the southern border into the United States. Angie Valeria Martinez Avalos and Oscar Martinez.
Peter Singer is a professor of bioethics at Princeton. I feel called today to name where and how people came to be where they are. So let me just tell you that Professor Singer is an Australian whose Austrian Jewish parents fled from Vienna to Australia after Austria was annexed by Nazi Germany. In other words, his people fled war and danger and threat to their very existence in order to find a better life for themselves and their children. And then he came to this country, I'm assuming to avail himself of the opportunities it afforded. And there is nothing wrong with that story. Professor Singer, in his book, The Life You Can Save, talks about how a single story of a life that's lost or in danger has this power to move us to great altruism and commitment of soul and body. Whereas statistics of evil, no matter how large they can be, how shocking, somehow move us to give and to serve at much lower rates. Something about the human psyche is such that our hearts and our willpower and our conscience needs something to make the call concrete and fleshed, specific and real. One woman who goes inspecting the detention facility says the thing that gives her hope is that she has been able to start telling the stories and others are telling them. And that, she feels, is the key. So we told 8 stories, showed 8 photographs, named 8 children, read their ages, words from their parents, details of their suffering and death, 8 chances to awaken. Neo-Confucian thinker Mencius, whose life spanned the 4th and into the 3rd centuries before the Common Era, he offered what he thought was proof that the human character was actually hardwired for compassion. His proof was the example of a baby crawling toward a well. Mencius said no one would hesitate seeing a child crawling toward a well to rush to save the child. They wouldn't ask whose child it is or whether that child is worth saving. We human beings, he argued, had something innate, something that responded to vulnerability, particularly of our own kind, and therein lay the seed, the sprouts of virtue that we were to nurture in life through action and reflection, sending them deep into heart and soul until full-grown virtue, a character of benevolence, was who we were. So this morning we heard about 8 children who crawled into the well. While we watched, most of whom could have been saved. And what we know right now is that there are thousands of other children crawling toward wells, because there are more than 11,000 children being held by the U.S. government on any given day, according to a July 3rd article in the Atlantic Monthly. They are packed into facilities that weren't designed for children, not made for the numbers of children who are there. We have seen photos of cages and bodies lined up, one right next to each other with only mylar blankets. And we hear of outbreaks of influenza, of lice. We have reports of inspectors, experts in early childhood education and development, who say that the caloric count of the food is inadequate except for the smallest of children. So children cold and starving, children being cared for, it turns out, by other children, 2-year-olds given into the custody of 7-year-olds who have no idea how to take care of a toddler. Children in clothes filthy, with bodily fluids, weeping, no chance for shower, hair matted like what inspectors saw in Clint, Texas. And there are thousands of people who are somebody's child, now of the age of adulthood, also in these camps. Right now, one report said 50,000 people are being held in facilities run by ICE, and something like 20,000 in facilities run by Customs and Border Protection, most in circumstances that are inhuman. One processing center in El Paso, my dad's hometown, had 900 migrants being held at a facility that was designed for 125. In some cases, cells designed for 35 people, and I'm sure that wasn't a spacious 35, are holding 155 people, the New York Times reported. So, yes, The camps need more doctors, more beds, more food, more showers, more heat in the cold ones, more air conditioning in the hot ones, more social workers to process paperwork quickly so people can be sent to the families that await them here as their asylum hearings wait to be held. But really, the camps need to be closed. Phil Zimbardo, professor of psychology at Stanford years ago, did his infamous, well, it was going to be a 2-week-long experiment in 1971. He took 24 middle-class, young, white college men who volunteered and had passed a psychological screening test. They all volunteered, some to be prisoners and some to be guards, and what happened spiraled out of control faster than anyone could have imagined. Within days, the previous normal, ethical, moral young people who were now guards got increasingly cruel, many of them, abusive, some of them, punishing secretly at night when they thought none of the researchers would be watching. Using power over to diminish, and the so-called prisoners started to show signs of trauma, weeping and screaming and withdrawing. On day 6, Christina Maslach, a recent Stanford PhD who was brought in to conduct interviews with the guards and the prisoners, called Zimbardo to account for what was clearly immoral as she watched men being walked to the bathrooms with bags over their heads. And the experiment was called to a close a week before it was supposed to end. In 6 days, my friends, in 6 days, good young people had become traumatized prisoners and guards and abused their power. And everyone who read about it, but especially those within it, knew how easily it was for all of us to slide into evil when the stage was set. Still, though, we set the stage. We imprison folks. And if power corrupts, as it does, we who are questioning of authority in our very bones as Unitarian Universalists, we know power corrupts. It's why we watch it carefully. If power corrupts, then absolute power corrupts absolutely, as it often does. So what then do we expect of camps made up of brown people in jail in a white supremacist, racist culture, brown people who have no rights on this soil? And what do we think happens when the least powerful, the children, are put under lock and key without even the courage of a parent to defend them? We have laid the table for evil. There are stories already of Lord of the Flies-like hierarchies and rules developing in each cell in which these random groups of children are thrown together to fend for themselves. Who will get a bed, who will get what privileges are chores are assigned, bullies and leaders, and the bullied. Children left to their own devices, and guards who pull out the beds and cots as punishment, leaving children to sleep on the cold concrete floors. Children, right, whose immune systems are worn thin by stress through 1,000, 2,000-mile journeys of being underfed, sleeping in the outdoors, under stressful circumstances, to say the least. So can we be surprised when they get sick? Or are we surprised that there aren't more tragedies to tell of? And if evil, cruelty, abuse shows up in our detention camps, can we ever pretend surprise? Really? Honestly, people. We have history to teach us. We have Zimbardo. Our own hearts know what happens when no one is looking too often, when power protects the adults, some of them, and not the children. Only willful ignorance can pretend that this is a recipe for anything less than a good chance of human beings' inhumanity to other human beings. Welcome to the U.S., we say. Allow us to abuse and traumatize you and scar you for life, you who are fleeing poverty and unspeakable violence. You who are not so unlike many of our own ancestors. So we people who would rush without thinking to save a child crawling toward a well, we have dug wells, it looks like, and are pushing children toward them. Never again, we once said, never again would we put people in camps. We said that to our Japanese neighbors when they came home to find their businesses and their homes sold off to neighbors who cashed in on the disenfranchisement that was based solely on race, or with families torn apart like my beloved friend Sat Oishi's was by what happened in the camps. Never again, we said, when our soldiers returned from Europe, seeing and liberating those camps of walking skeletons, those the lucky ones. And refugees from genocide took the remnants of their lives, like my best friend's parents, and began to resuscitate their future from the ashes. Never again, we said, would we let human beings be motivated by hate or notions of racial superiority or use fear without us challenging that rhetoric. Never again, when slavery ended and we wrenched power from white hands in the civil rights movement and white Americans began, as we did, to reckon with our original sin in the founding of this nation, never again would we allow ourselves to see some human beings as fully human and others as 3/4 of a human being or no person at all. Never again, when we reckoned with the theft of land, this Ohlone land included, and called it our own and murdered and cheated to keep it. Never again would we think of the boundaries of yours and mine so simple-mindedly, knowing fully the history of this place we call our own, and maybe as micro-reparations for the theft and Manifest Destiny's brand of state-sponsored terrorism, maybe we would share what we took. Will we? Never again is easy to say, and harder to mean, and harder still to live. I have a colleague, Stephen Jonason, who's the large church consultant for the denomination. He used to say that sometimes congregations forget their best selves, and in those moments, we, the moral leaders, we, the loyal, faithful members, we keep those best selves in sacred keeping, he said, until the community can reclaim it. I loved that idea of our responsibility. And the same is true for us as individuals. Sometimes someone keeps our own best self in sacred keeping, and the same is true of nations, right? Not that we won't forget our best selves, because we have again and again, and we will, but that when we forget, we hope and we trust that someone or some group of people, something will draw us back to reclaim our best self. We are in that time. again. Time to remember what we said we would not forget. Time to shed our desire for comfort and surrender to the routines of life with their smaller challenges. Time to surrender the desire to do what is socially acceptable and maybe begin to lose a little more sleep than we already have. Hit the pavements, talk about the unseemly, the political, wear our conscience on our sleeves, spend our money where it has even the chance to bring leverage for change. Time to say never again and mean it. Time to do so until the us gets bigger. And the strain of our voice, to rephrase poet Naomi Shihab Nye, catches the strain of all voices and entrains the world in the same call for humanity and reckoning until justice rolls down like waters and beloved community means all of us, and the human family doesn't stop at a border, and the least of us is safe. Time to catch the children. Time to catch everyone. This week, Catholic priests and nuns and lay folks protested in Washington. There are reports leaking out of Border Patrol agents who are speaking from consciences that will not be quieted about what is going on. There are people taking to the streets all around this country. There is a tide rising. So the good, great news is we are not alone. It's just our job to do as we will today and join our power and our privilege and put our creative, witnessing energies into the rising tide. Because one story is enough to break your heart, and there are already too many stories, and more will follow if nothing changes. So, today we declare that never again begins now. Never again. What it means will unfold. But as one wise person once said, she said it from the pulpit just last week, we do what we can and we trust in the mystery. And as another wise person said, no snowflake ever knows whether it will be the cause of the avalanche. So, my beloved snowflakes, we will go forward to resist. I want to invite Bruce forward, Bruce Neuberger, to share with us a little bit about what is going to happen the rest of this morning.
Hello, everybody. We would like to invite everyone here to join us in the courtyard outside for coffee, tea, and other snacks, and we'll be briefly preparing for our performance outside the church, which will be a simple but powerful and very public declaration, joining, as we just heard from our Reverend, a cry being heard across the country, never again is now, close the camps. So we'll see you after this service, and thank you all for being part of this.
invite us to, you'll notice the order of service, for those of you who come more than just today, is a little different. So we're going to rise as you're able, join hands. If you don't want to join hands, if you are immunocompromised or just don't feel like holding hands, just cross across your chest and we'll keep you included in the larger circle of love. We're going to say our benediction and then we're going to sing together, "There is more love somewhere." You won't need your orders of service for that, I am told. And when we sing it through a fifth time, we will exit and you all can get some coffee and take care of yourselves and then join in together on the steps. In our comings and our goings, may the light of love shine upon us. Out from within us, be gracious unto us and grant us peace. For this is the day we are given. Let us rejoice and be glad in it, remembering there is more love somewhere. May we carry that into this day. Amen.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till find it. There is more love somewhere.
There is more hope.
There is more hope somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more hope somewhere. There is more peace. There is more peace somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more peace somewhere.
There is mercy.
There is mercy somewhere. There is mercy somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is mercy somewhere. There is more love. There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere.
overcoming fear and uncertainty,
overcoming fear and uncertainty,
to struggle with all we've got, to demand, shut down the camps, never again is now. The Trump-Pence regime must go.
All right.
Okay, so now for the children who've been lost, pledging to a world for them, and for our children and the world they're going into, we want to sing together that there is more love somewhere. There's love here in this community that we want to empower what we're doing.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere.
There is more peace.
There is more peace somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more peace somewhere.
There is more Chloe.
There is more hope somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more somewhere.
There is mercy.
There is mercy somewhere. There is mercy somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is mercy somewhere.
There is more love.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere.
Thank you so much. All right. All right, folks, that's it. Please take that message and share it with other friends and family.
And remember, there will be more actions. There'll be a larger interfaith group. Sign up for on the clipboards, take a flyer, come to our letter writing, and some of us are going to be here on Wednesday morning between 7:30 and 9 if you would like to join us, letting passers-by know how we feel.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Close the camps. Reunite the families. Close the camps. Set the children free. Close the camps. Reunite the families. Close the camps. Set the children free. Close the camps. Reunite the families. Close the camps. Set the children free. Close the camps. Reunite the families. Close the camps. Set the children free. Thank you, everybody. Take that message and